Welcome to the Chirp YouTube channel. My name is Christy. I am your friendly online speech-language pathologist and specialist in children's communication development, including, as always, behavior, which we're talking about today, because behavior is one type of communication. We have been going through a little series, you can find the whole thing right there, about simple strategies to improve interactions between us and the children we care about, and between those children and other people they may encounter in their lives. Because doubtless they will encounter other people, and it's important for them to have the skills that they need to interact well. And I want these tips to be simple because our lives are already complex enough. Our tip today is about behavior. We've been advancing through skills in order of the development level of our children we're working with. We started out very simple at the beginning, very early developing skills. And now we have moved on to discuss some more challenging issues like behavior, challenging behavior. And today I would like to talk about one of the first things we need to do when we are assessing how to handle a child's challenging behavior. And that is, we need to decide, is this a behavior that is purposeful, or is this a behavior that is responsive? These are very different things. If you'll recall, in the video I posted last time, you can find right there. If you didn't watch it, pause, go back, watch that one. It's very important. In that video, I talked about how important it is to be a behavior investigator, to truly look at all the angles around the behavior that we're seeing to find out what could be leading to the behaviors and what might be rewarding the behaviors or reinforcing the behaviors after the child does them. And once we have figured out some of those things, we're much more likely to be able to know, is this a behavior that is on purpose? Or is this a behavior that is a response to a stimuli and the child is not purposefully doing this behavior? I think this is very complex and also very misunderstood. I just did a continuing education course myself this week. I'm required to get lots of hours of continuing education every year in order to maintain my speech-language pathology license and my certification through the American Speech-Language Hearing Association, also known as ASHA. You can find more information down there in the box if you're interested in that, if perhaps you are interested in becoming a speech-language pathologist, or if you would like to know more about what my personal qualifications are. My professional qualifications are those. I am certified by ASHA. You can find me in their database. And I am licensed by the state of Minnesota, because that is where I live. And this continuing education course was on the topic of challenging behavior, oppositional defiant disorder, and strong-willed children, to be specific. And one of the things that the instructor said was that many adults, including many teachers and parents, assume that if a child does not do a behavior we want the child to do, that it's because the child just doesn't want to. And if the child does a behavior that we don't want them to do, it's just because they're being sassy. This is not the case. Sometimes a child wishes to be disrespectful. Most of the time, the reason a child doesn't do what we expect him or her to do is because he or she cannot do it. It is ableist to assume that people can do the things we want them to do and just are choosing not to. And it's hurtful to children when we assume that they are being obstinate just because they feel like it. Usually that's not the case. Usually there's some other reason. Even in cases of oppositional defiant type of children that sort of behavior, we're discovering more and more of the neurology behind these disorders and the fact that there are different neurochemicals in these children. The way their brains respond to things is very different from children who do not have difficulties in these areas. For example, we are learning more about cortisol levels in children with oppositional type behaviors and how they seem unable to control the hypothalamus. If you can't manage what's happening in your brain, you can't control what behaviors might come out of that. Now, I am not saying that these things can't be fixed, because we definitely want to be working on them, and I will talk about that more in upcoming videos. But we need to recognize what might be causing these flare-ups of challenging behavior, and therefore we can figure out what to do from there. No matter what the behavior is, whether it's purposeful or whether it's a response behavior, we're going to still deal with it with compassion and with patience and with all of the other skills that we bring to our practice, to our parenting. We are not going to force children physically and harshly into doing things just because we know the behavior is purposeful. That's not how we succeed in our relationships with children. We need to have the same level of compassion and patience no matter what, because these things are difficult for children. Cleaning up is difficult for children. It is not very easy most times to tell if a behavior is purposeful or if it is a response. In the cases that I mentioned last week, and you can find that video right there, let's start with the little twins. Whenever they were asked to clean up, they did some sort of behavior. In that video, I discussed how they threw their sippy cups at the wall and milk went everywhere. We could actually have a pretty in-depth and creative discussion about whether this was actually purposeful. While it clearly had some elements of being purposeful, these children's brains were hyper-reactive. They found things difficult that other children did not find difficult. Most children don't have trouble sitting down with a grown-up putting blocks back in the box. It's not that hard. It can be fun, especially with me. Miss Christie is really fun to clean up with because we play little games, we do speed drills, we see who can do it faster. It's not that bad. These little kids, however, had a hyper ferocious anxiety response to the idea of cleaning up. And we needed to calm that down. And we did that by helping them through the process. And by doing it slowly, the grown-ups did the majority of it, talking them down when they were feeling really hyper and crazy and crying and yelling. We helped them by helping them realize it wasn't as big of a deal as they thought. And it happened over time, and we were patient and compassionate. The other little child I talked about last week is someone in my current program, and he was biting, pulling our hair, and pinching our faces. Do you think this is purposeful, or do you think this is a response? I decided that this also was a response. And in most cases, behavior is a response. It is not a purposeful act of defiance because a child wants to be a jerk. Children don't naturally want to be jerks. Most children want to please adults and want to have friends and want to be reasonable, and they sometimes cannot do it. Cannot. Not will not, but cannot. This little child has tons of sensory needs. He's nonverbal. He doesn't communicate successfully with visuals, with symbols of any kind, or with any sort of gestures. He's kind of trapped in his body, unable to communicate what he needs. And we're figuring it out because of the behaviors he displays. Because he crashes into us and walls, I, with enough experience, can tell that he needs some deep pressure. Because he bites us, I can tell that he needs some more deep pressure to his jaws. These behaviors are a response to his sensory needs being unmet. They are a response. Here's another example. I had a student a few years back in one of my classrooms who was reasonably calm. He had a diagnosis of an autism spectrum disorder, and I had known him since he was about 4. And then all of a sudden, his behavior started really getting bad. He was very violent. He was throwing chairs. He was trying to hit us. He was tipping over tables, and he had gotten bigger. He was probably about 9 at this time, and he was a larger kid. And we didn't exactly know what to do. I have training in nonviolent crisis intervention and in how to restrain a child who is violent so that no other children are hurt. We did move the kids to the other side of the classroom and tried to, keep everyone safe, and no one was hurt. But that is a scary situation, especially when it escalates quickly. One time I asked him, "Why are you doing this?" And this is not a good question for kids, because especially if it's a response behavior, they're not going to know. They can't change it because it is a natural response to what's happening in their body. And that's exactly what he said. He said, "I don't know." But the way that he said it, I could tell that deep inside, he did not want to be out of control. I don't believe any child wants to be out of control. And we need to work on the compassion to realize that kids are working as hard as they can to manage themselves. And sometimes what they have is not enough to get them there, to keep them calm. And that's where our job comes in. Most of the time, the behavior is not a purposeful behavior meant to infuriate you. Most of the time, the child is responding to the environment, to what's happening in her own body, to noises that he hears, with the resources that he or she has, and this child is doing the best that he can. And it might not be enough to meet your expectations. And that is where we need to be able to flex our expectations. We need to realize this child is absolutely working as hard as she can. And she is not succeeding in this particular case with fitting in with the other kids. That doesn't matter. Or with keeping herself quiet. That doesn't really matter either. Or with being nonviolent. That does matter. But what can we do to help her so that she can, with her own resources and with the resources that we can share with her, so that she can succeed? It's a hard thing to figure out because kids are complicated. But I can tell you right now that we're going to assume most behavior is a response to something. And with the video that I did last week about behavior investigating, you can probably figure out some of what is causing the behaviors. And then we can figure out what to do about it. And we're going to talk about that more in upcoming videos. I do want to say at the end of this video that if you believe that some of these behaviors might be a response to sensory needs, I have the answer for you. It is this playlist right here. It is my sensory modalities playlist, and it goes through all of the different sensory areas areas in which we receive information into our bodies from outside our bodies, and the ways that sometimes there can be a mismatch between how much sensory information the child's body wants or needs and how much the child is currently getting. And there are lots of ways that we can help balance that out so that children have a better option, a better possibility of being able to manage themselves and stay calm. I recommend that if you think there's any sensory piece to your child's behavior, and in fact, even if you don't think there probably is. Everybody has sensory needs, all of us, and they're not usually met very well in this big wild world. So, whether or not you think your child has sensory needs, please watch that playlist if you haven't already. Even if you have, maybe a rewatch would be in order, because that information changed the way that I do practice and changed the way that I interact with kids, and it changed the way that I think about myself and typical children also. It's important. And I will be back soon with more information about what to do when we've figured out some stuff that might be leading to some behaviors that we don't know what to do with. In the meantime, I would love it if you would leave comments down below about some behaviors that you see, maybe from your children, maybe from children you work with or children you know, and you're not sure what might be causing those behaviors or how you can help the child work through them. I would love to respond to those because I have seen a lot of interesting behavior in my career. And it's one of my favorite things to figure out what the behavior actually is communicating and how we can veer that behavior in a more functional direction, a way that actually meets the child's needs and isn't offensive to the world around her or him. Thank you for being here today, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.